All right, welcome back. I hope you found our previous session, which tackled three pillars of holistic well-being: financial, physical, and nutritional, as enlightening as we did, as we heard from specific experts in each field. Now, in our next session, we'll tackle a bit of an introspective but ambitious topic: bolder and wiser, navigating adult relationships in our 30s. I'm not sure whether I would consider myself bolder and wiser in my 30s, but I'll love to tackle this topic anyway with our celebrity panel here on the big topic, right? Relationships. I guess some may be wondering, why are we talking about relationships in a mental health or well-being festival? And actually, coincidentally, last night I watched this Netflix show. I think it's called in Your Hundreds, or about longevity, featuring Singapore among other interesting locations like Okinawa, Greece, and Mediterranean. And it actually touched on some interesting insights about how Singapore kind of deliberately fostered specific adult friendships and, of course, relationships with your parents and so forth through their internal policies and nudges. And how, when the host actually mentioned, his takeaway was how this has eroded in, well, the perspective being modern American lifestyle, where it often kind of separates family and friends as they grow older. So I guess as we touched on today, the show touched on how relationships in general could be an interesting factor for longevity beyond just mental health and typical, eating well and working out. So now, again, I didn't check anyone's age here, but assuming that we all ±5 in the millennial age group, we venture into this new decade, armed with so-called life experience and wisdom. We'd love to hear from the panel about insights they have gained about nurturing and sustaining meaningful relationships. So without further ado, we'd like to touch and introduce our panel, right? So joining us today, we have Aiken, Chia, Eswari, and Hanli. So maybe each of you can say a quick word, and I'll, of course, will introduce you shortly after.
Hi everybody, I'm Aiken. I'm so happy to be here. I spent a lot of money on therapy for the last 2 years, and I'm finally making it feel like it's gonna be more worth it to share it here. So yeah, this is making it worth it for the therapy, I hope.
Hello everyone, I'm Gunasagar. Like what you can say, it's such a pleasure to be here. And I just want to say a quick reminder, it's okay not to be okay. So yeah, I'm really excited to be part of this panel.
Hi guys, I'm Hanli, and Frank, I am with you when you said I don't know if I am bolder or wiser, but I am honored to be alongside Aiken and Eswari to discuss, a very introspective and important topic. So thank you for having us.
Great, thanks a lot all, and again, warm welcome. So I'll be briefly introducing each panelists as well in greater detail shortly, but of course we would love to get into the questions shortly. So in our next slide, maybe about Aiken. Aiken, of course, is an independent content creator, host, and founder of Every Good Endeavor. That's a production studio created for mission to create content that makes a positive and tangible impact in the social media industry through authentic and relatable content. He was also previously the producer, host, and face of over 200 episodes of Singapore's most watched food series, Food King. Next, we have Eswari. So as she shared, Eswari is a well-known actress and host in the local media scene. She's also a mental health advocate who is passionate about breaking the stigma around mental illness and is committed to providing resources and support to others who are struggling, and believes that everyone deserves to have access to quality mental health care. Apart from her passion in the local art scene, she also has a strong belief in sustainability, kindness, and equality, evident in the content that she puts out and collaborations that she has. Finally, and last but not least, Hanli, of course, brings to us a diverse background steeped in travel and the arts. She is a presenter, advocate of mental well-being, and actor. Her journey is interwoven with holistic wellness, sustainability, and female empowerment. This is evident in her content creation and brand collaborations. And of course, she's renowned as an outspoken advocate for her beliefs, standing as a prominent Southeast Asian media figure. She's also a strong advocate for mental well-being itself. All right, so that's a lot about everyone, but now we'll actually hear from you, of course. So I'd like to jump into the panel questions. We'll divide into 3 sections to So maybe in the next slide, we'll share a bit about how we want to touch on relationships from firstly parents, right? Where naturally all of us deal with generational, both challenges as well as naturally strong bonds with our parental figures. Being authentic with our friends is an interesting aspect as well as we get along our lives, and finally being vulnerable with our partners. So I'll venture a bit into the first section on parents, right, and generational mental health as a whole. So this question is a big one, but maybe before I come into this question, just a more simple icebreaker for the group here. Maybe I'll start with Aiken, and then Eswari, and then Hanli. So just a quick icebreaker, not this question on the screen. Maybe we'd just love to hear a bit about, how your relationship with your parents are, and if any, how did it change when you grew up, right? Was there anything that substantially changed in that process, or is it very much the same as, when you were younger?
So I'm from a single parent family. We grew up lower income most of my life, and I'm still in touch with my dad, and I live with my mom. So I think a lot of when I was growing up, I would say like some of the past traumas really came from growing up in this environment. I think when I was younger, I was really like yearning for my dad's approval so much, like as a small boy. But I still maintain that relationship with him. I think it has changed so much because I now have in my 30s, I truly look back, and now that I'm more self-aware with about like my own pain, or I'm trying to be, I also had the chance to examine my parents' upbringing. So I asked both my parents, like, hey, what age did you lose your parents? What were some of the identifiable patterns that they grew up with and therefore are still living out? And that's helped me to maybe be a little bit more empathetic and approach our relationship bearing my patterns as well as theirs in mind, bearing some of their own trauma that maybe they are not even aware of in mind. And it's helped me to really understand them a lot better. Yeah. So I still have good relationship with both my parents. It was so difficult as a teenager and in my 20s, but I'm happy to say it's a lot better now. Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing. Obviously, it was definitely sounds like it wasn't easy growing up, but thanks for sharing and being vulnerable. And also interesting how you touched on the patterns and almost a bit like a trauma that could have happened on a generational basis, right? I think what I've heard a lot, but never actually heard people sort of tackle and discuss with their parents about it. So that's really interesting. Now, Ishwari, over to you. Any overall sort of changes that you may have encountered with your parents when growing up?
I think for me, at different stages in my life, my parents play different roles. Like when I was a young girl, I think they were more like very strict parents. And then as I grew up, they became more like, friends, where I can talk to them about anything. But I think apart from my parents, we are a big family. So I have three siblings. So I'm like the middle child. And I would like to say that being the middle child is never easy because, I feel that I always had to fight for attention, which is not intentional from my parents' side. So that at many times I had to do a lot of things to seek validation from my parents. So that wasn't really easy. I'm sure, I'm very sure they didn't mean it that way. Like they were like, they didn't do it on purpose, but it was a little tough growing up as the middle child. But of course, I had wonderful parents. But I think being middle child was a little tough on me. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I think that's something that many in the audience can probably relate to. I think many families were, of course, different sizes, but quite significant. I think many of us had either ourselves or friends with, easily between 3 to 6 siblings, and very much saw that kind of dynamic as well.
Yep.
Now, Hanli, over to you. Any changes that you saw, with your parents or as you grew up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something we can all relate to in our hormonal teenage years, is that we tend to blame our parents for almost everything. And I can admit that sort of carried on to my early 20s. It was a confusing time for all of us. And so I think the easiest answer was to just blame them. But as I got older and I started to look a lot more inward, and I started to be a lot more compassionate with myself, I realized that I was then changing my own lens, and I was able to be compassionate towards them. And that was the biggest switch. It was the switch of realizing that my parents were human. And that really brought down a lot of walls on both sides. And now my relationship is great. with them. It's always going to be a work in progress, I think. But I think it's the acceptance that it's always going to be a work in progress, which makes the journey a lot more acceptable, I guess, and pleasant and almost joyful, because you get to choose to make it joyful, if you will. So yeah, we're quite good these days. And also for me, I'd like to add, so I'm mixed race. So my mother is Singaporean, Chinese, Peranakan, and my dad is German. So it was also an interesting dynamic growing up with two different cultures within the house. But I can touch on that later when we dive into this question. So I'll save that.
There's almost two different dimensions going on, where there are generational, of course, divides, and then you mentioned also cultural dynamics, which is really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. And I think definitely can relate. For me, I think to keep it short, I think my outlook on my parents changed a lot the day I saw my son. I think that was, for me, that moment where I was like, okay, things are changing, right? So anyway, not to dwell too much on that. That's a really nice, I think, base that everyone has shared, and can maybe jump into this somewhat big question, right? I think what we have been hearing a lot from not just our clients, but also the general public as we went about, our content, our socials and past events, is this stereotype that Asian parents don't talk about mental health, right? I'm not sure whether this is something that any of you can relate to, but would love to hear from your point of view. This can be, of course, from any personal challenges you may have faced, or even things that your family or other outside family, or rather extended family members may have faced as well. So just to start again with Aiken, and then we'll, of course, go down with Eswari and Hanli as well.
Yeah, so actually that day I literally sat my dad down, I think, and I asked him, what was it like growing up and losing your dad at a young age? My dad lost his dad probably when he was 9 or 10, and they were in like this at a time where Singapore was like basically building, right? And everyone was very industrial. So everyone's focused on like, okay, we need to survive and we need to make money. So he recounted the funeral, but very factually. So he would say like, oh, they were wearing gunny sacks. They were like, there were people at the funeral. And he would just say it like factually, like what he saw and what he observed. But he would say nothing about his feelings. And that really struck me as quite odd when I asked him about his dad passing. And that also gave me insight. And I said like that, these are all like descriptions about the funeral, but how did you feel? And he was confused. Like the look on his face was just like, what do you mean? How do I feel? Yeah, and I just realized there and then that maybe back in his generation and back in his time, and even in that event, he wasn't taught how to process his feelings. He wasn't aware that he could feel this grief, and he just went like, I didn't know how to feel, just move on lah. Life has to go on. That's sort of the mindset. And so when we say there's a stereotype in that Asian parents don't really talk about their feelings, I think I started to have a little bit more understanding, because I started to realize that it's not because they don't want to, it's because in the time and sort of pattern that they grew up, they themselves didn't have an opportunity to be to reflect inward, to look inside, and to even process how they feel in a healthy and safe manner. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? I completely agree with Aiken, like what he mentioned. I think like my parents, they come from a generation where I personally feel that like even my parents, they want to believe that their children are okay. They are fine. They're pretty much in denial that no, you know what, there's nothing wrong with my kids. My kids are completely fine. So they are afraid to address certain issues. And like what Aiken say, they come from a place, like from a generation where they don't know how to express themselves, because it's only in the recent times we hear more about depression, mental health, anxiety. But I'm pretty sure back in those days, they are so involved in making money. They want to provide for the kid, they want to provide for the family. They don't really give like, they probably know that, you know what, I'm feeling this way, but I don't know what exactly I am feeling. But it's only during this time there is a label to it that we're able to identify, you know what, I'm going through certain things and probably I am depressed. Like we are able to address it. But our parents, they don't know how to speak about it, and they don't want their children to be associated, because at the end of the day, parents just want their kids to be okay. They want them to be fine. They don't want their kids to be labeled in, they have mental health issues, So I think that's the reason why, especially my parents, they didn't really talk to me about mental health. I mean, they'll probably ask me things like, are you okay? How was work? How was your day? But they don't ask me like really, how are you feeling? Are you really okay? They don't really ask me questions like that. And I completely understand why.
That's such a good point, Eswari. And I think you started off by saying it's okay not to be okay when you introduce yourself, right? So I'd love to touch on that, especially for the next question. But I think what you just shared is so relatable. And I would even maybe venture so forth to say that if you or in another context, someone were to say, I'm not okay, how do you reply that, right? Like suddenly you're like, oh, right, she didn't say that she was okay. How do I deal with this situation now? It's kind of that feeling. But love to of course hear a bit more as we touch on that next question. So Hanli, of course, on your side, is this something you have encountered as well? How do you feel about this topic?
Oh, I feel so many things towards it. Well, first of all, definitely I can relate to this. I think a good example of when I realized there was a real gap between the understanding of what mental health is between myself and my parents is when the topic of therapy came up. Now, I'm someone who I love therapy. I've been in and out seasonally for years at this point. And I remember when I explained to my father that I was going to therapy and just like the confusion of on his face. And I really had to explain to him that just because I went to therapy does not mean that I am, extremely mentally unwell, which is what like his reaction assumed. He was like, what's wrong with you? Like for him, it was dramatic that his daughter was going to therapy. And I really had to explain to him like the whole concept that therapy is like a gym. We want to exercise our muscles so that we stay healthy. And it doesn't have to mean that we hit a wall and we have a complete, breakdown to end up in therapy. It can be something that guides us and supports us along the way. But even just that conversation of having to explain that, like the child to the parent, having to break the dynamic of being the one that teaches them was just such a clear example, like, oh, there is such a gap here between me and my parents of just understanding the whole conversation around mental health. And so I actually wanted to save my comment about coming from a biracial household for this, because from my experience of having a Western father and an Asian mother, I relate on both angles. I think a lot of generations feel like maybe it is our culture, our Asian culture, that our parents don't talk about mental health. But I can say from my experience with a Western father that it happens there as well. So I think it's beyond culture. I really think it's like generational globally. That we are just at a time as millennials so fortunate to be the ones to break barriers and be the first generation to have these conversations openly. So yeah.
That's really good. Yeah, that's really, really good.
Hence this event. But
Totally.
thanks so much for sharing that. And I love that you addressed that big topic, right? Because I think in Singapore, I feel that the excuse of it's our culture, it's Asian culture comes up a lot.
Yeah.
But clearly you address that that's not, in this case, a right excuse. It's something that happens, and how do we address it together as a society to, mature and so forth. And you of course touch on the topic of therapy as a gym, right? I love that analogy. And I may even take the analogy a bit further by saying that similar to how therapy could be a gym, if in physical health, you wouldn't go to, I don't know, like a yoga webinar and feel like you're cured, right? But the yoga webinar would be the start of how you would go on to take, classes, improve, similar, I think, to how we have mental health events like these and, therapy to help individuals out and exercise that mental fitness of sorts as they go on. Great. I think that's a perfect maybe segue to our next question, right? And I think this is a question I really love to hear from everyone again, because now that we have heard a bit about the background and the challenges that you faced, I think part one is kind of addressed. I'd love to touch a bit on part two, especially, and maybe I'll share with the panel that many of the people listening in that we have seen as our attendees and clients even are the students from our universities, right? So these are our next generation. It's like we are lucky to service both the students of National University of Singapore, NUS, and NTU as well. That's a combined pool of, easily more than 50,000. So what we've heard from them very much is this, right? The need for mental health is very much seen in that age group. In fact, a casual look at a lot of NUS forums and chapter touches on this, right? But many of their parents also still face that first challenge when that is usually the first time, maybe in university or maybe in junior college, that is raised, or in higher education that is raised. And they face that challenge of like, oh, I want to see the university counselor, right? And then how would the parents react? So maybe this time we'll mix it up. And Hanli, as you mentioned the topic of you were explaining to your dad how you took that approach. Is there any strategies or takeaways that you leave with our audience for if they're facing a challenge in the same boat, if they're telling their parents about going to a counselor or speaking to a therapist for the first time?
Well, I would say that our mental health is under the domain of our responsibility. And so we should always take the first steps to look after ourselves. And if that means going ahead to see a therapist or a counselor before consulting your parents, then I absolutely support that. I think that if we wait for permission, we're kind of giving our power away or giving someone else the green light for our own benefit. So that's one example for me. Do what you need to do. I think also for another strategy that will help is that, I mean, everyone's relationship dynamic and the conversation is going to go differently. So I think it's also important to kind of draw out for your own sanity and your own peace, what your boundaries look like to you. So I think, sometimes if like we're so stressed about having the conversation with our family about our mental health, maybe we need to draw a boundary of, okay, how much of that can I actually share with them? And it might seem unfortunate at the beginning. It might seem like, oh, I can't share, but that doesn't mean you can't share. It means for now, when you're beginning to start your journey, know where your safe space is for you and stay within that space. You don't need to give it all away. Just do what's right for you. Did that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So actually, Hanli, I completely agree because that's exactly what I did. When I started to go for therapy, I actually didn't tell my parents at all that I actually started to go for therapy because I think one thing, I didn't want to worry them because I think I came from a family where my parents just wanted us to be normal and happy. They don't want any I didn't want to feel like, something's wrong with my daughter. She's not feeling well. And I know my parents worry too much about us. So I told myself that I am not going to, do that to them. I don't want to worry them unnecessarily. I'm going to get the help that I need first. I'm going to make sure that I get better. And once I knew that I was getting better, once I knew that I was getting a perspective of what was happening to me, that was when I started opening up to my parents. I told my mom, it's been some time, but I'm actually going for therapy. This is what I felt. This is how I'm feeling right now. And surprisingly, my mother took it very well. She was listening to me, and I was very concerned that it will worry her and she'll start to worry and that will affect her health. I was actually pretty much afraid, but I think to me, I felt that at that point of time, communication and how you tell them is very important. I completely agree with what Hanli said. If you think that you don't have to tell your parents, it's okay, because you have to address whatever that you're going through first. Whatever happens around you is very much secondary because you have to face your battles alone. But when I started speaking to my mother about it, she was just glad that I was getting the help that I needed. As long as my daughter is getting better, that's all that mattered to her. Sometimes we have so much of assumptions, we get very anxious, like, what if my parents feel this way? What if my friends feel this way?
Yeah.
But you will be surprised when you start speaking to about your feelings honestly and openly, they will receive it the right way. But sometimes it might go the wrong way, but it's okay. If your parents are not able to understand what you're going through, it's fine. You take care of yourself first. That's what that matters the most. Yeah.
Such a good point. Again, I can tell you want to jump in here. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to affirm everything that's been said because I think my parents sort of found out that I've been going through therapy when I spoke about it on a public platform, and I shared my story very authentically. But they also are aware of everything we've been through together as a family. So what was so mind-blowing was that I didn't want them to see it. And I'm like, there's no way they're gonna find this obscure little mental health video, but they did. Right. And the interesting thing is one day my mom popped by my room and she said, I just want to say I saw that video and I'm very sorry for everything that, if I caused any of this. And it really, like what Eswari said, it opened a door for just an opportunity for an open and honest conversation. My dad as well texted me one day and he said, I truly didn't know you felt that way all these years. It wasn't my intention to make you feel like you are less than, but I thought I was trying to motivate you. You know, and I think that a lot of times, like what Eswari said, like when we are vulnerable, when we have a chance, I think it opens up a vulnerability in them as well, that they feel like, hey, I can access this and I can speak into that. Having said that, there have been times where I brought up certain things that were very difficult or were very intense, right? And I knew that, oh, perhaps they are not ready to
Mhm.
go there. And they themselves have maybe haven't thought it through, which is why I love what Hanli said. It's then very important to go in with that boundary before, to say like, hey, I might go into this topic, but I know they may not be ready, and that's okay, as long as I know where I stand in this, and it's okay. Yeah.
That's, I think, really, really strong words of wisdom from everyone. I think we heard the importance of taking sort of personal responsibility for your own mental health, and tackling it directly as and when you need to. Of course, I think drawing those boundaries is what many of you touched on as well. And I think I liked earlier about the discussion around assumptions, right? Because I think it's true, very much so. It's like, oh, I don't want to talk about this. How would people feel about me? But actually, you never really know how they would react, right? And as you mentioned, being vulnerable and not having any assumptions is important when addressing such topics. That's I think a really nice note for us to move into that next segment. So this would be kind of going into the idea of relationships with friends. I think this is an interesting area, of course, because earlier we chatted about how having, at least based on one Netflix documentary, I haven't done my research. It claims to say that in Live to 100, a strong social network that perseveres in your older age is extremely important component for most of what the world's blue zones, i.e. places where people consistently live to 100, have as a key kind of commonality. So I think for many of us, of course, when we grow up, many of our friends come from earlier parts of our lives, earlier hobbies, groups, activities, and naturally that may face less immediate opportunities as we grow older. So maybe we'd love to hear from the group here. How do you deal with that process of not just, I think, losing friends, but because I don't think we ever lose friends per se. It's more like we just don't have as much opportunities, and may only connect with them on a much more occasional basis. We'd love to hear your take about this, and touch on like how that's affected, I think, your sort of personal boundaries as well when you grew up. So would like to maybe start off with Eswari this time, and would touch on with the rest later as well.
I think losing friends is just a part of growing up. As you grow up, you will come across many people, and I've always believed that every person who comes into your life, they have a purpose. They have a purpose to teach you what life is, or a person to make you realize what kind of person you are. So it's a completely normal process of losing friends. But I think over the years, I have learned to accept that. Acceptance is very important. Like, you have to accept that certain people come into your life to teach you something and they leave. I think once you are able to master that acceptance, you will be okay with losing people in your life. Because not everybody is going to follow you in this journey. There are definitely going to be people who will not be able to understand, the person that you are becoming, or they'll not be able to comprehend the person you are, or they'll expect things out of you. And once as a person, once you know who you are, or when you're trying to realize who the person that you're becoming, you will know that this person no longer have to be in your life. You have to identify when that person is becoming toxic in your life, and you have to know when is the time for you to let go of that person. And it's complete. I mean, along this journey, I'm 33 years old, 33 now, and in this journey I've lost a lot of friends. I do keep in touch here and there, but I'm not as close as I used to be, and it's completely okay, because I feel that they are not say they do not serve me any purpose. Like I said, everybody have a purpose in their life for me, and I feel that their chapter in my life is pretty much over, and I have moved on from that chapter. As long as they're happy, I'm happy for them. But I feel that at this point where I am right now, I feel that it doesn't make sense for me to have these people around me, because they are not making me better or make me feel better. That's very important. Are your friends making you feel comfortable with who you are? And I think if you don't feel that way, it's okay for them not to be there in your life anymore. So it's a completely normal process of growing up, if you ask me.
Makes sense. It's kind of a natural process, and kind of having that acceptance that it is natural,
Yeah.
and hence almost drawing those boundaries about knowing who you are and which friends really help you to be the best versions of yourself in
Yes.
that way. Yep. Oh, I'd love to address that with Hanli as well.
Well, may the bridges we burn light the way. No, that's too dramatic. I fully agree with Eswari that it comes to a point where you just got to realize what's good for you. And it's sometimes as simple as that in saying, but to be honest, from my experience, losing friendships has been one of the hardest parts about growing up. Because when we were little or younger, in any case, we never really believed that friendships would end. We always had this idea that, romantic love ends, partners end, boyfriends end, girlfriends end, all that stuff. But we never actually grasped that your friendships end until they happen. And so, yeah, that's something that was one of the biggest challenges for me. Now that I'm older, I'm at a point where there's a lot more understanding as to what happened. I do feel like I take a lot more accountability these days as I did when I was younger. I can admit that full and honestly. But these days, I'd say that losing friendships is, like Eswari said, something that happens a lot more naturally when it comes with acceptance. And I'd even add that sometimes it helps when there is also no need for giant explanations.
Yeah.
I think when I was younger, and I think a lot of us relate to this, we have those kind of friendships that fall apart with so much confrontation.
Yeah.
And it's just so unhealthy. And especially as women, like we have like the female friendships growing up can be really toxic at times. Women have that like catty ability. And all of us have fallen victim to it or even being the perpetrators of it. Like that's just life. But now as we're older, I just don't feel those needs anymore. And it is a lot of peace for myself to be able to let go without the drama, without the confrontation, and also with the wishes of well-being onto the other. And I think that's a big realization of one's maturity, the day that you do that.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I think it's interesting how you mentioned the perspectives when we are young and how that changed when we grew older. Probably Disney didn't help that, but very much true that as we get older, that perspective changes. Right. So Aiken, would love to pass this question over to you and wanted to hear from your perspective, especially in Singapore. I think if I jump generations and somewhat, make a general stereotype, it does, I think, get said often that the elder sort of male generation, I'm talking about 50 to 80s, sometimes have issues keeping friendships, right? I think this has actually been addressed at almost like a pseudo policy level, on a community level. There's quite a lot of areas and initiatives to tackle this, from family service centers and things like that. Of course, we no one here is from that age group right now, but we'd love to hear your take as well and how that fits in.
Perfect. I love that you brought it up because I was just going to talk about sort of like the opposite, which is like, how do we not just like deal with losing friends, but keeping friendships now that we're adults? And one of the I'm very blessed because I grew up like only child, right? So I was always looking for family. I was always looking for friends. And I was very blessed from a young age to try and like figure this out. Like, how do I keep friendships and how do I make them real and sincere and, that will weather the tough times together? And it's of course not to say I haven't lost a lot of friends as we do in our 30s, but I think what has really helped me is taking initiative and then reciprocating. And I think this wonderful dynamic and rhythm of that keeps the friendship alive. It's really like what has been said, right? Like the friendship that lets me feel that I can really freely, truly be myself, that my friends see me and they know me and they love me. But then there's also this dynamic where I'm initiating. So I'm asking, hey, you want to get dinner? Hey, dinner on me. I'm celebrating your promotion. Hey, congratulations. I'm keeping in touch. And then there's also a time where then my friend will, like, I threw the ball and then my friend will catch the ball. And then after a while, my friend go like, hey, dinner, you want? And it's about that lovely, beautiful dynamic of taking initiative and then reciprocating. And I think that this is what has really helped me over the years to keep like a group of, I would say at least I've got like 10 friends I can tell you, like they know everything about my life, start to finish. They know everything about me, all my struggles, all my difficulty. And I, without a doubt, have no doubt that they have got my back and I've got theirs. And I think that if we continue with this dynamic of taking initiative and reciprocating, then we can do that. And of course, it's sometimes not as simple because relationships get complicated. But if we could keep that rhythm up in the first place, that will really help us to grow. And I say this as a single person where I haven't had a relationship like a long-term relationship in a long time, because sometimes, right, I really feel like so nourished from these friendships that it already, it's great. It's really, really great. And so I believe it's possible. I believe it's possible to keep good friends that are authentic, that really nourish you as family does, even like all through your life.
Can I ask something there though, Aiken? Can I jump?
Yes.
So I love what you're saying about it is, the responsibility of just making an effort both ways. But you feel like someone who is just so extroverted, you're so friendly,
Yeah.
so caring. But what if the person that you always invite out isn't the one who invites you? As in, are you the one that's always reaching out to them, or are you kind of keeping a check if it's balanced, or is it just their nature?
Yeah, so I have a friend who is one of these 10 of my close friends. I get so busy and caught up in Singapore that I don't often make the initiative part. And one day he said, like, so he's always like, hey buddy, we're due for a call. And he's in Melbourne, right? And we've been friends since we were kids. So I go, like, one day I just said straight up, I said, Sam, honestly, right, I need to apologize because I haven't taken the initiative to even contact you. You always make the first move to say, hey, let's get on a Zoom call. And he said something that absolutely blew my mind. He said, I know that you've got a lot going on all the time, and I've accepted that if I want this friendship to work, I can just accept that I'll be the one making the initiative, but I'm grateful when you reciprocate. And then I go like, wow, that is so honestly, without him making the initiative and accepting that and just not holding that against me, we wouldn't have a friendship, So I really appreciate sort of like sometimes it's about working the mechanics and working that, like, what works for this friendship and being able to be mature to understand that and then apply that. Yeah.
Great answer. And also, that's a friend for life. What a
right?
Yeah.
What a bro, right? No,
Yeah.
I love that, and I can see how you mentioned that adulthood is about passing on that almost like a ball of sorts, where sometimes it's your responsibility to initiate, sometimes you're waiting for someone, and of course it takes two hands to clap. Someone may not always have the chance to reply, but as long as they're thinking about you, and you take that chance to let them get reminded of that, I think that's what you just shared with us. That's so important. So maybe on that note, I'd like to transit to our last question, where I'll try to ambitiously combine two of them, right? So this can apply to both your friendships that we just touched on, or any relationships as well. So I guess it's about similar topic as we just addressed with your parents. How do you be vulnerable to your friends and loved ones, right? Whether it's your partner or your close friends. Sometimes, especially if you know them from a much earlier stage in life, you might have a certain image, they might have a certain kind of like expectation of you, but your vulnerable self may be different. So would love to hear, I think, from anyone, how have you become in any occasion supportive of your friends' mental health and well-being, or your friends and loved ones supportive of you as well, right? This can be consciously or unconsciously, right? So unconsciously meaning more of like not knowing that the issue exists, but just kind of looking out for each other, and of course consciously being actively vulnerable and talking about the challenges at hand that you or your friends may face. So I'll just let this sink in a bit, right? Maybe Aiken, as you're mentioning with your friend circle, is that something that you've encountered? And guys being guys, is that something that people want to address, or in a very maybe indirect manner?
Yeah. So I think that you say guys being guys, right? And a lot of guys, I guess, pride themselves on being like, yeah, very straightforward. I'll just say as it is. And that is sometimes like the path that I have to go. Like, if we're being straightforward, if we're being honest, most of the time, I think the barrier to that is to think that no one's struggling, to assume that everyone's got it together. So now I go on the basis of assuming everybody is struggling. And I think that helps me a lot. And it's really like that depth of vulnerability, right? Nobody is exempt from it, unless you are, a psychopath or something, right? Or sociopath, like psychologically. But if you are just like, you and I, it's actually easy to access. And a lot of the times I go now on the basis that like, I think life is hard in general, and it's been hard, and it will be challenging. And I want to have an opportunity to be real and just go there with a friend. A lot of the times, I've had some friends say to me that I'm not like that, or you're more sensitive, or you're more empathetic, you're more emotional, and I'm not. But I do I don't really believe in that. I mean, yes, I am, but I believe that if I love someone, right, I'm able to just communicate openly. I need to say what I need to say, and I hope that whoever is my friend would be the same for me. So sometimes it's really just about like whether it's addressing, or to just say like, hey, is everything going okay with you and this person, for example? It's just as simple as asking that, or and then like supporting that friend through. And then for me, a lot of times it's also, hey, actually I'm not doing well. I've really been processing this. Like, do you have 5 minutes to hear me out? And then just sharing that problem. Yeah. Again, I find that vulnerability beckons vulnerability, and people start to open up when we open up to them as well. Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing that. And I'm just very curious as well. Like you mentioned, there was this video that you did a couple of years back. I think that could be, or I'm not sure whether it's the same one. I watched a video that you did with Beyond the Label, right, on national campaign. Was there any friends that watched that and was like, oh, I didn't know this part of Aiken? Like, just curious whether you faced any such like responses.
Yeah, because I think everyone thinks, I mean, the sort of media work that I have to do, like, is a general happy tone all the time. So to be like, oh, I actually had very bad anxiety attack when in 2021, right? It's like you are like, yeah, but that's why when Eswari in her bio just now said, like, she's gone through and she's lived there, I'm like, wow, even that became like oh my gosh, someone knows what I went through. So already there's a point of just like mutual compassion and understanding, and feeling like, oh my gosh, there's somebody else that understands me. Yeah, so I think sometimes it's really important. I think all the more if you're a happy host, you need people who are able to help you along. Yeah.
That's true. Is that kind of the personality, and being obviously still, as you mentioned, everyone faces challenges at the end of the day, no matter what you do and how happy you may feel or look in front of the screen.
Yeah.
So I think that's a nice note to maybe hear a bit from you as well. What's your take on this?
I think it really boils down to being kind. I think it's very important, like not just your friends, but to anybody and everybody around you. Because I think I've been in a place where I just wished somebody could come and ask me, are you okay? Are you doing fine? Like, those words might mean nothing to other people, but someone who's struggling at that point in time, it would mean everything. So as someone who has been there, who has lived through it, who has experienced it, I think I know how much value those words hold. So I take the opportunity to always, like, even no matter how busy I am, I always take the opportunity to check on my friends. Like, even when I'm scrolling on Instagram and I see this random a person who posted, like, they're feeling very down, or they shared something, it's a little worrying. Even when I don't know that person, I'll just drop them a message saying that I hope you're okay, whatever that you're going through, you're going to get past through it. I think kindness, like, it's very important, because you have no idea what battle a person is going through, that the person next to you might be smiling, or, like, being a host, you have to smile, you have to laugh, you have to engage, but you have no idea what you're going through behind the door. So I think being kind, it just boils down to being kind, not just to yourself, which is very important, but to everyone around you. Just ask them, just check on your friends, even if you have no idea. Even at this point in time, it's okay to assume that they might be going through something. So just drop them a message. So I think that's how my friends have always been with me as well. Even though I might go missing on them for 3 days, 1 week, they're always going to be there, because they know the person I am. They know what I've gone through, because I've spoken to them about it. So I think communication and being kind is very important.
Thanks so much for sharing. I think it's that common thread I'm hearing, right, about everyone having their own challenges and story, and how can you help in that process? Hanli, would love to hear your take on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything the others are saying. I'm just like nodding here, like, yes, team, be kind. It's quite simple, right? But it's like such a good reminder. Just treat others how you want to be treated yourself. Something that I can speak on experience that did help my relationships and mental health is that sometimes, I realized that there were certain relationships of mine that didn't actually know how to ask for help. And so I realized that, while we can do our best to extend out, sometimes we miss timing because the other doesn't know how to ask. And so one thing that really helped me, actually, this was with my brother. My brother is on his own mental health journey. And at a certain point, I realized that he's not great at asking for help. And so I remember telling him like, hey, you don't need to call me. You can just send an emoji. That's it. You just drop like a little emoji. We came up with like the emoji we'll use. You just send me that emoji and I'll know that you need a little lifeline. And that kind of concept, I'd love to like apply it to other friends of maybe just being like, hey, I need support. It's not your language. Let's find one that works for us.
Wow.
And yeah.
I think that feels like really interesting, right? Because it's almost like a nudge of sorts where it seems small, but it's incredibly potent when utilized. And I think actually intellect can learn from that as well. I love to sit on this and think about how that can be used. But that's so insightful. Thanks so much for sharing that, Hanli. And again, for the whole panel, this has been a really nice conversation. I appreciate all of you taking time to be vulnerable and share more about your personal stories. I think the audience today has heard a lot of insights from you about how to address this with their different sort of relationships, whether it's parental, friendships, or loved ones. And I think as we move forward, I think love to, of course, close this heartfelt discussion, but at the same time, recognize that it's very much okay not to be okay, as we've touched on throughout the panel. So again, a warm thank you to Aiken, Eswari, and Hanli for being here. And, we'll, of course, see you, for the audience, we'll see you at the next session of Mental Health Festival. Thanks again.
Thank
so
you.
much.
Hey guys.